very nice to be here. Very nice conference. I want to thank the organizers. So I think the important thing is that I have been working both in terms of the modeling, also in terms of the communicating the policy process with the actual board members and policy makers. And I have been also working in TAs with Doug actually at the IMF for several central banks. So I have been basically seeing the interaction of the modeling world, actual policy decisions, and so this is going to be the focus of my talk today. Now, continuing Governor Galstian's speech, basically in the FPAS Mark II, the important thing which is new is basically that we get rid of this obsession with the baselines. And I think the word obsession is not an exaggeration, because if I give you the practical policy point of view, the way it works, and my interviews with lots of board members at different central banks, is that usually every board member wants to make sure that their views, people listen to their views, so they want to make sure they can affect the policy. I know it sounds strange that board members who make the decisions in many cases want to make sure that their views are incorporated in the policy, but that's the reality. I think that everybody is really worried that their views are going to be lost. And the reason is that in many cases, when you look at the baseline forecast world, the energy that the team spends on making the policy is really on calibrating this baseline forecast, 0.1s, 0.2s of inflation or GDP growth for this year or next year, because there is a game that is inherently created in this world, that if you want to affect the policy, you need to make sure that your views are actually expressed in the baseline. So this is a very dangerous game, because if you play this game, it means that all the energy, instead of having the scenario-based discussions, because the real world is very complicated to incorporate in this one scenario, is actually spent into the advocating that your views have to be in the baseline. So if you think the growth is going to be higher next year, or different factors, this is going to waste incredible amount of resources. So what we find is very interesting is that despite the fact that in the FPAS Mark II, we advocate for having more than one scenario rather than baseline, in fact, you are going to use much less, or you have much less resources. We think there is a, you can actually decrease the time of the forecasting process at least by 2, having this process, because exactly the reason that instead of trying to calibrate very accurately all these, data issues and making sure that forecast is correct, you are actually going to talk about policy with the board. And this is important because I think there is a, in many cases, even in many FPAS Mark I central banks, there is a misunderstanding that baseline forecast is actually the policy. So this is, I think, a very big mistake, because baseline forecast is just one input to the policy. But this misunderstanding, again, shows that there is a big issue connected to this game. The second practical aspect, which I think is important, is that once you liberate everybody from this game, where you have to create this perfect line that everybody likes and basically has this ultimate truth that professional forecasters and central bankers give to the market, once you liberate everybody, the board members are actually free to imagine their own scenarios and discuss the practical policy. And this is again very important in practice, because in reality board members have different backgrounds. Some of them are monetary policy people, some of them have been more modeling people, some of them have been market people, some of them have been even in different roles, corporate roles. So you want to create a safe environment where the policymakers can talk. And this, when you create this scenario-based environment where your staff actually is assisting the board to create these scenarios, and this requires much more professionalism from the staff level, in that world, you actually get much better decision making. The reason is that in the world where you have baseline scenarios, usually the people who are good debaters, we call them master debaters, are really successful into getting their views into the baseline scenario. This is again my experience. And in most of the cases, this really gives them, in the decision-making process at the central bank, what happens usually, you actually lose the insights of people who are actually introverted and don't talk much. And in my experience, in many cases, these people have the best ideas. So this is, again, yet another aspect of this FPAS Mark II that we want to emphasize, where you can actually create a safe environment where board members can actually imagine this scenario. So I think this is, again, yet another dimension that you want to have this process there. Now, the third dimension is the practical one, and I think people who have been involved in management and have been managing teams, they know this for sure. As you know, nowadays, I don't know what is it, what's the reason. Probably it's too many emails, but you know, we managers are incredibly bad at mentoring people. So in this world where everybody's burnout, that you spend 2 months of, you know, in the forecasting procedures, you have a couple of weeks to rest, and you know, you have another 2 months to go with the same thing. Basically, people are burned out. This is a real issue that I've seen again. So people who are continuously working on this forecasting process in the central banks, it's very difficult. So here again, when you have these 2 months periods where you concentrate so much on the details, unnecessary details in terms of talking about the policy, you actually lose this mentorship culture in your institution. Whereas we think it's really important, because once we actually you know, shorten the time period, we make this more effective. We make sure that people, instead of trying to forecast things, make everything right, but instead of that, talking about real policy issues, we think that will free up lots of space for actual real mentorship for people, which I think is a real problem around the world.